Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our third installment of Conversations Worth Having. We're so excited to be here today. But before we get started on our topic today, which is understanding suicide, we do have a few announcements. I can't believe it's September. Is anyone else absolutely shocked that it is September? Time is a myth, but I guess it still passes. So again, thank you so much for being here. After this is all wrapped up, this conversation will exist on our IGTV as well as our YouTube channel once everything gets edited and put together. So if you're not watching now, or if you wish someone else was able to watch, it's all right. You can send it on to them after the fact. Last week, we discussed barriers to help, and that was an incredible conversation, one that you can still catch up with on our Facebook page, on IGTV, and YouTube as well. We do have more content coming at you. So next week is National Suicide Prevention Week in the US. Next Thursday, a week from today, is World Suicide Prevention Day. So we are going to still be having conversations throughout that week. Keep an eye on our social media for the times and the platforms in which we'll be presenting those, or you can send us a text to 321-204-0578. That's our community SMS text line. So if you want to have a better feel of the pulse of this campaign, send us a text there. We would love to stay in touch and find ways to work with you in order to make this campaign as impactful as possible. For fundraising, you've heard it once, you've heard it 1,000 times. We have a goal of raising $250,000 for treatment and recovery. That's $250,000. And we've targeted goals that ambitious because we believe that with that money, we can help fund over 3,500 counseling and group therapy sessions, as well as sponsor 45,000 different searches on our Find Help tool. If you aren't familiar with that tool, swing on over to TWLOHA.com/findhelp. And using that, you can find free and reduced cost mental health care services specific to your zip code. We are currently at $94,000, so we are rapidly approaching our halfway mark. And again, just all of our gratitude goes to y'all for spreading the word, for throwing some dollars in that direction. With your help, I really believe that we're going to be hitting that goal. You may have noticed our shirts, our Worth Living For campaign shirts. You can still get one in time for WSPD, but you gotta order today. So if you reside in the US, today is your last day to order that WSPD pack. And when you do order today, we're gonna be giving you a free 2-day shipping upgrade right to your house. So basically just make a purchase. And if there is a WSPD pack in your order, you can order more than just a pack if you want. Then we will upgrade that shipping to express for you before we ship it out. There's no promo code that you need. You just got to place that order. Lastly, we do hope to take a few questions today. So if any of our conversations sparks some ideas or sparks some extra questions in your mind, feel free to drop those in the comments field. We do have members of the TWLOHA team that are responding, that are pinning some resources as well throughout the day. And yeah, so if you have questions, drop them in the comments field, and our team will shepherd those onto the panelists. Lastly, as we mentioned last week, we want to, I know I just said lastly twice, I'm sorry. This is really lastly though. I know last week we started off just as with a message of solidarity. So again, we want to extend our thoughts, we want to extend our hearts, we want to extend our good vibes, whatever it is you need. We're sending that to the folks in Lake Charles, the folks in Gulf communities, the folks that have been affected by Hurricane Laura. We have friends and family that live in that area, and we know that you also probably have friends and family. So we are thinking of you, and we're cheering for you as the recovery effort begins. And again, all throughout this season, all throughout this year, we have been saying that Black Lives Matter. We know that the past week, the past 2 weeks, the past month, the past months before that, the years before that have been hard to navigate. And if you are looking for hope and help, resources do exist. So we have a bunch of resources that we published for our BIPOC Month series. And yes, if you have any questions on how you can access mental health care for and by people that you identify with, then we are there to help build that better bridge. That said, we are so excited for this next round of panelists. We're going to be bringing them on and give you a chance to get to know some of the voices that will be contributing to the conversation today. Looks like everybody is here. And yeah, let's start with some introductions. Heather, if you'd like to start, just let us know who you are, what makes Heather Heather, where you're calling from, and who you're here representing.
Sure. My name is Heather Monroe. I'm an integrative psychotherapist, and I specialize in trauma. And I am calling in from Nashville, Tennessee, down south. And I am representing Newport Academy, which is a series of mental health centers that treats trauma and mental health issues in teens and young adults. And I'm also representing my own company, Monroe Wellness, that is an online and offline platform that helps educate and heal issues around trauma. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
And let's go ahead and move around clockwise. So Michele?
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Michele Giordano. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the VP of Digital Crisis Services at the Trevor Project, which is the largest organization doing suicide prevention and crisis intervention for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning young people. And I'm calling in from Maplewood, New Jersey.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
And I'll take the baton. Dr. Nzinga Harrison. I am co-founder and chief medical officer of Eleanor Health, where our vision is to help people affected by addiction live amazing lives. So we provide long-term, compassionate, outpatient substance abuse treatment virtually in the home and in the clinic. I'm also host of In Recovery, a podcast produced by Limonada Media, where we break down stigma and barriers and talk about all things addiction with the goal of bringing us all together. So thank you for having me.
That's awesome. I love, just before we get into the questions, just how well kind of the breadth of our partnerships are represented here. So with Newport, we've been able to partner with y'all for a number of World Suicide Prevention Day campaigns. Trevor Project, we've been fans of y'all's for so long, and any opportunity to work with y'all is one that we value and we really hold sacred. And with Limonada and Nzinga, we're just so thrilled to have you. We've been able to connect with a number of folks through the Limonada family, and yeah, this is just such an awesome way to wrap up these conversations worth having, just getting all these varying touch points. So once again, thank you all for taking the time to be here. So the theme today is understanding suicide, and it strikes me that just those two words we were mentioning off air, it's such a broad stroke is represented in two words: understanding suicide. Everything that we've said in the campaign up to this point is that suicide is a complex issue. There are layers with public health, there's layers with personal help. There are, none of these stories, even though they share commonalities, they're all unique, that we're talking about individuals and their own lives and their journeys. That being said, suicidal crises, they rarely happen in a bubble. Oftentimes there's underlying context or diagnoses or struggles or drastic life shifts that really kind of spur on this crisis. So for whoever wants to answer this one first, what have you identified as some accompanying life factors to consider as we discuss suicidal ideation? What are some, I guess, for lack of a better term, the signs that someone may be struggling with thoughts of suicide?
I can jump in if you want.
Yeah,
So I think it's a two-part question. One, the first I believe that I heard was, what's the underlying issues around suicide? And then the other one was, what are some of the signs that someone is struggling with those thoughts? So what I have found in my work, and please, I welcome jump-ins and just discussion around it. But what I have found in my work is that trauma, which in the simplest sense is an injury, is the underpinnings of so much mental health crises. And I also believe that it is impossible to be human in the world that we live in today and not be traumatized to some extent. And so when we don't understand what happens to our brains and bodies and just be able to normalize it to kids and understand that through trauma we create survival instincts, whether that's anxiety or depression, thinking about the past so that we don't have to go back to the past. We develop these survival instincts that to a certain extent serve us until they don't serve us anymore. And so with suicide, and addiction is a huge one. And I found with a lot of my clients that struggle with addiction, it was actually a saving grace for them because the other option was to die. So what I find with people who struggle with suicidal ideations, there is a lack of understanding around the pain they're feeling and where the pain comes from. And then also an inability to be in the present moment because the present moment is too painful. So that is what I've found around just the underpinnings of suicide with the kids that I have worked with and the young adults. But I would welcome other people to jump in there as well.
Yeah, I'm on the same page, Heather. And so I was thinking the common denominator there is pain. And so we can say injury, we can say trauma. When I've talked to people before that say, like, I don't understand how anyone could attempt suicide or how anyone and will get away. Like, I'll say this for the audience, commit suicide. We'll get away from the phrase commit suicide because you commit crimes and suicide is not a crime. You can die from suicide, but like taking that pejorative part out of it. And I just say, think about the moment in your life where you felt the deepest, most intolerable, most unbearable pain and not being able to see an end to that pain. And you can understand how dying starts to look like the only solution. And so I think part of being able to recognize, like you said, being in that moment, part of what helps people see beyond that moment is connection and compassion. And so those of our people who are at most risk for attempting suicide or dying by suicide are those where I say, as a psychiatrist or at Eleanor Health, what we believe is like when we have people in our community who are hopeless, we have to be able to be that shining light and stand in that moment and be your hope when you don't have hope so that you can try to help usher someone out of that pain. And so I would say disconnectedness and just sitting in that unbearable, seemingly endless place of pain is where suicide becomes an option and a real risk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to add to this too, because I think there are a lot of themes that resonate also with the Trevor Project and what we see in LGBTQ young people. I mean, one of the factors that we know contributes to the young people we serve, of course, is the day-to-day discrimination and stigma and rejection they're facing in their lives. And then you're compounding that with other life high-risk issues such as unemployment and homelessness, which we also know that for LGBTQ youth, they're faced with that at a disproportionate rate. And then we layer the time we're living in and how COVID-19 has really exacerbated these risk factors. We know that young people are living in unsafe environments, communities that aren't welcoming to them. And so on top of feelings they may already have around depression and anxiety and isolation, we're living through a pandemic that can really heighten and intensify those feelings of being alone. And so the Trevor Project, through our 24/7 chat, text, and hotline, our aim is really to make sure that young person does not feel alone and that we can meet them where they're at and that we understand the intersectionality of their identities and that the stresses they're dealing with day to day relate to their identity as well as the other risk factors that may be really impacting their ability to see themselves and the future in front of them.
Yeah. As all these responses were coming in, one thing that I think you each hit on was this sense of disconnect, this sense of, it's different to feel lonely than it is to feel alone, and so often one thing that we hear is with these narratives of suicide and suicidal ideation is the sense of being a personal burden on people around us, that perhaps the emotional load of our friends, our family, our coworkers would be lessened without us. And I'm just wondering if, through y'all's perspective, what would be ways that are appropriate in combating that narrative, that we put it on the shirt, that it's worth living for, whether it's these moments of celebration or even these moments of pain and desolation, that they're worth living for to connect with others. How would y'all rather address the conversations of combating the sense of feeling like a burden?
Yeah, I think to magnify a couple of things that Heather and Michele said in the last segment, we are pack animals. And so I think the concept of worth living for is like, there's a lot in life that's worth living for. But what we try to tell, and especially our LGBTQ youth and members of other marginalized populations, so racial and ethnic marginalized populations, people who are growing up in poor conditions, all of the ways that in this country we undermine the innate worth that each of us has just as a human being the moment we come out of the womb, is like, you are worth living for. That yes, there can be a lot in life that's worth living for, but to me as a person, you are worth living for. And if we can, the data shows, and Michele will know this even better than I do, for our LGBTQ plus youth, just one adult, no matter what the relationship is, just one adult saying to that kid, you are worth living for. For people with substance use disorder, just one person saying you are worth living for. For one Black person, you are worth living for. Your life matters. Decreases that disconnectedness and that alone, to know that life is worth living, starting with I and my innate human value am worth living for.
I'd love to piggyback on that. Ditto everything. We are hardwired for connection biologically. And so when we feel connected, we have oxytocin and dopamine and serotonin and all these things in our bodies that tell us that connection is safe and it's sustainable. Like, this is where we want to stay. And when we feel disconnected, cortisol and adrenaline and all these things that cause dis-ease and also disease, when it gets too much and too chronic. So, but what I find so interesting about the human experience is, on the one hand, we're hardwired for connection. On the other hand, we have this survival instinct of creating us and other. And then there's this disconnect of there's them, right? And they're the enemy. Whether your skin color, your religion, your sexual preference, your orientation, that's them. And then there's us, and we're going to fight for us and our connection. And I believe that we lose our humanity in that primitive instinct that's no longer necessary for our survival. I believe at this point in time, we are creating an opportunity to either become conscious or more unconscious. And the consciousness would be, we are all interconnected, that there's nothing separating us. It's a delusion, and it's not necessary anymore for our survival. As a matter of fact, the only thing necessary for our survival is more connection. And in a time where we're supposed to be more connected than ever through the interweb and social media, we have never had more disconnection and more disconnected mental health rates in our teens. And there's something to be said about that.
Yeah, I think that theme of disconnection is really important, and something that we see a lot in our work at the Trevor Project for our young people. In our most recent national survey, we found that 40% of LGBTQ young people actually thought about suicide in the past year. And then on top of that, more than half of our non-binary and transgender youth seriously considered committing suicide. And like Dr. Harrison said, we know that one caring adult can actually combat that. But what we also find is that many young people feel like they don't have that, or they don't know they have it, or they haven't looked into their community in a deeper way, or in their school or in their church to find that person for them. And so we really make sure that our counselors can be that person for that LGBTQ young person who's reaching out to us, and to meet them where they're at. And having that LGBTQ competency and a time where a young person that is either questioning their identity or knows their identity and is not sharing with anyone becomes really critical, because you want to be able to see yourself in the world, and you want to know that in the support that you're getting, that person on the other end of our chat, text, or phone line can meet you where you're at, and you don't have to explain that to them.
I love that. The fact, and we talked a lot about it last week with our Barriers to Help conversation, that you deserve good things. And one of those good things is not having to explain every bit of yourself in order to feel valid in the sense of a conversation. And I was speaking with another friend just yesterday for a future podcast. We were lamenting that making friends in childhood was easy. We were kind of forced into socializing. No one told us that growing up, making friends is harder. And that sense of connection, if you are losing connections from middle school to high school, and high school to college, or as you enter the workspace, that it just gets harder and harder to find a sense of reliable and sustainable friendships. And so often the conversation for suicide prevention is focused on youth, on young folk, but we know that the risk of suicide increases with age. The lessons that we're learning in youth will carry forward, and if not challenged, if some of these unhealthy narratives aren't challenged, then they just take a deeper root, and it makes it harder to find that help. So I guess with that sense of understanding, what are some of the myths, some of the beliefs that y'all see in your work that start in young people's minds that often go unaddressed as we enter early adulthood and later on? I guess, in a sense, what does the development of the mind look like in how it relates to suicidal ideation?
Well, I can speak for the kids that we treat at Newport. One of the reasons I love working with adolescents that struggle with mental health disorders is because they are the ones that are calling BS on a lie that's been told to them culturally. That starts very, very young, which is, if you study hard and you get the right grades and you meet the right person and you're the right sexual orientation and you have the right amount of kids and you get the car and you get the clothing, then you'll be happy. And there's no talk of social emotional learning within the home and within the school around what happiness truly is, that the goal isn't happiness. The goal is actually learning to deal with uncomfortable feelings and resiliency and grit. So these kids, two things can happen. Either they come from a place where that's not an option. So if that's not even an option because of socioeconomic and racial and systemic issues, then I'm never going to be happy. That it's not even an option for me. So then where do I go from there? Or there's the other way, which is, okay, I've got all the right things. Let me try and make this and fit into this box. And then you've got, then you make it and you're miserable. And everything in our consumerism and in our culture is telling us, if you drink this drink, if you do this, then you'll be happy, then you'll have friends. So this lie is being perpetrated into us through our culture. So that's what I see. And that is also why I think one of the highest suicide rates, correct me if I'm wrong here, is white males, I think 35 and up. And I see that as they're the ones that made it. They're the ones that are supposed to be happy now. So that's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of good points that you made there, Heather, around like the stigma and shame and the expectations that young people can carry over into adulthood. I find that one of the things of the Trevor Project that becomes really pivotal in our work is actually reducing the shame around seeking support and starting that conversation early and hoping that when that young person reaches out to us, that they know that they're on a lifelong journey to thinking about how they bring support into their lives when they're in a crisis and when they're feeling isolated and alone, that those feelings are normal, and that when they are feeling the compounded stress of discrimination and rejection and violence, that what they're feeling is real and not imaginary. And our counselors are really able to provide that empathy and meet young people where they're at, I think, in a way that can be really hard to access, especially when you're a young person who doesn't have access to mental health resources or healthcare, or looking for an LGBTQ competency that you haven't been able to find or that you don't believe is there for you. So, part of our work is really thinking through reaching young people ages 13 to 24. And that age range is wide because we know that crisis and suicide prevention work needs to be carried forward early into adulthood to make sure that young people have the right tools to navigate these hard waters and to be able to really lean in on themselves to find the resources and the help they need in their journey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna need a neck brace from nodding so hard. Like I'm like, yes, my head's gonna fall off of my neck. I think it goes back to culturally, from the moment we're born, we start getting the message that your value is determined by what you accomplish, instead of just like your value is your value. And so it's like, oh, my kid walked at 9 months. That's better than your kid that walked at 12 months. Oh, my kid's 2 years old and can say a whole sentence and yours only says mama. It's literally from the time we come out, it's what you do is where your value is. And like Heather said, in schools, not taking the opportunity, none of us is born with coping skills. And so what we have to do from the very beginning is, like, literally when you're an infant, as soon as you feel the smallest bit of distress, you scream out and flail your legs and cry and tears stream down. Somebody come save me from this distress. And what we should be doing in schools, as much as I love math and algebra, and it is important, and as much as conjugating our verbs correctly matters, what we really should be focusing on is like, when you get those feelings of discomfort, how do you manage that? How do you reach out? What skills do you use? How do you use mindfulness to be in this moment? How do you recognize that this is just this moment? This is not forever. And reducing the stigma, like Michele said, of reaching out for help, making it easy to know, like, when you're 6 years old and your throat hurts, to ask somebody to take you to the pediatrician. You have no idea when you're 6 years old and your heart hurts. You don't know who to talk to about that, or who to ask for help, or who to go to. And we have to make it easier. And the last thing I'll say here is, like, yes, actually, we learn in medical school, the highest risk group for suicide is the 60-plus-year-old white male who has had either a job change or a spousal loss. Like, these are the biggest. And it's because we define in this country, like, being married gives you more value. having a career gives you more value. Having money gives you more value. And so as an identity, like even in physicians have 4 times the suicide rate of the general population. And unlike the general population, where a suicide attempt is often proximally related to a personal stressor, in physicians, that suicide is most often proximally related to a professional stressor, because we're trained into our entire identity being physician, and something goes wrong at work and doctors are look, I got to work on my own language, are dying by suicide. And so if we can really just try to start, the last thing, I know I'm talking so much, but the last thing when Michele said, not every child can find that one person. Like, if as adults, if we can just commit, like I told my kids, tell all of your friends, if they can't find that one adult, your mom will be that adult for them. If they're thinking about suicide, if they're struggling with drug use, if their heart hurts and they don't know what to do with it, your mom will be that one adult for them. And it's not just our kids that need that, we're pack animals. So as adults, we need to know who that one person can be for us also.
For sure. And then I think once you find that one person, once you find that someone out there has your back, that gives you a bit more courage to reach out to other avenues for support. You know, so often when we're talking about a crisis, it feels like a free fall, right? And when you find that one person, you now have a tightrope that you can stand on, which is a lot better than free fall, but you deserve more than just a tightrope. You deserve a safety net. You deserve something that, you know, doesn't matter if you fall to the left or to the right. You are still supported. And this was over a decade ago, but we saw on YouTube and social media at that point the It Gets Better campaign, which was really pioneered by our LGBTQ friends, but has really kind of broadened to so many people a touching point, a rallying cry that you can survive this, that whatever it is you're going through, it gets better. You can trust me in that because I know how you feel. And for me, that really kind of draws the conversation into one of perspective. We know through our previous 2 weeks of conversation that it's a common feeling to not feel equipped to talk about suicide. That's stigma. That's maybe barriers to help. We don't know who to ask. We don't know if it's okay to ask. But at no point should you feel like you are the only person who is asking. We know that suicidal ideation is not uncommon. Over 1/10 of this planet has thought about suicide. So as we talk about understanding suicide, can we talk a little bit about the spectrum or continuum where people experience suicidal thoughts? And maybe even we can branch off into talking about what interventions are critical to helping that person find care and healing. I know, Nzinga, you were talking about being that one person. If you can't find anyone else, like, pick me, put me in, coach. Like, I'll be there to remind you. But yeah, if we could, maybe we can, whatever piece of the puzzle you care to talk about, the spectrum of experience in suicidal ideation, or the points of intervention that are available regardless of where you are on that continuum.
Yeah, so I'm happy to talk a little bit about the interventions and the way we respond to young people when they reach out to the Trevor Project. And we're really intentional about having a phone, text, and chat line because we know the population we're serving, and we know that young people need different ways to reach us. And we also know that there's a level of discretion that can be really accessible through chat and text, and that's really important for us. We train our counselors to assess all levels of risk, and we also train our counselors to understand the compounding effects of risk factors, and that there is not a one-size-fits-all when someone is really considering suicide and in a crisis and reaching out to us. And that's a huge piece of our training because it's so critical to know that a risk factor for one individual may not be a risk factor for another. And where a young person is at in their LGBTQ identity is going to look very different across the country and across ages. And there should be no expectations and no judgment of meeting where that young person is at and what they're struggling with. So, a lot of our work is making sure that we're training our counselors to sort of meet young people where they're at and whatever they're presenting, but also not being prescriptive and offering advice, and really helping that young person navigating their own resources, their own internal strengths, because we also accept that we'll never know all the details of that individual's and young person's family life, economics, instability related to homelessness or education. And so we want to make sure that we're able to support that young person with the information they're presenting to us in that conversation and assessing the risk along the way. And also that if they need us again, they know that they're reaching a non-judgmental space where they can come back to.
I'll add to that or do you want to ask something, Chad?
But no, have at that. And then we can,
something that I work on with clients, depending on where they are on the spectrum of suicidal ideation, is just reality checking. So being that safe space where they can say a thought like, I have nothing to live for. And being able to explore that a little bit more with them. A lot of the times when we're in a sense of hopelessness and that kind of depression, it's very polarizing. And so there's a sense of hopelessness or a sense of nothing to live for. But then when they start talking about it and talking through it, they mention their siblings or they mention a friend. And so a lot of these statements that are really polarizing, when they take a closer look, they actually have little wedges of connection that we can put in there where it's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to say, where they're able to kind of reframe thoughts and be able to just see their life through a different lens than just through the suicidal ideation lens. So that's something I really work with them on. And also mindfulness. I am heavy on mindfulness practices with clients. Teenagers especially, talk therapy is really hard for them. It's hard to express their thoughts. The part of their brain is, I'm sure that you could say much more about this than I could, but their part of the brain isn't completely developed around their cognitive processing. So what I've found really helpful for them is music therapy, movement, mindfulness, yoga, art therapy, ways to creatively express themselves, even drawing a picture and just explaining it to me, drawing a picture of what hope looks like, drawing a picture of what hopelessness looks like. All those things are able to reprocess the parts of their brain that can access different neural pathways.
I think that's so important. As you were talking about, music being a therapy module, I was just thinking as a teen, as a young adult, I had more language at my disposal to describe music genres than I did my own emotional experience. That I can tell you, 17 subgenres of punk, hardcore, and metal, but I couldn't tell you what kind of angry I was, or what kind of sad I was, or what kind of happy I was. And we found that is such a barrier to help, is just lacking the language to adequately sum up what it is we're walking through. So even in there, I think it's important to, and Heather, you were discussing this a little bit, and maybe Nzinga, you can chime in a bit too here from a clinician standpoint, but the difference of experience between having suicidal thoughts and having a plan to carry out an attempt of suicide. Could you help us understand the language a bit more as we dive into the continuum of suicidal experience?
Yeah, I can definitely help with the language on the continuum. And I'll just, before I jump into kind of like the clinical words, what I'll say about your comment that you could tell us 17 different subgenres of metal, you could also have said, this song is how I feel right now. This song is how I feel right now. And part of working with young people, you may not have the words, but when this song is reflecting your feelings, how do we deal with that? How do we be in this moment? How do we move from this type of song feeling to this type of song feeling? But thinking about the continuum, and so this is really important for people to be able to recognize in ourselves. Like you said, 1 in 10 people has thought of suicide in their lives. And so importantly, you are not alone. That is almost all of us, right? Like it starts maybe just with thoughts of death that don't necessarily attach to you. Like, I'm not that I would be the one dying, but just feeling like this thought of death over this thought of life. And then moving into what we call passive ideas, passive ideation, which is like, if I were dead, things would be better, or I would be better off dead. But it's like a passive considering if death is an option. And then moving into what we call active ideation, which is, I want to die. So you see the passive move from that verb, like, if it happened to me, I wouldn't be sad, from this feels like the only way out. It is time for me to die. And then you move from ideation, so just thinking about it, into actually planning. And so if I were going to do it, this is how I would do it. And then from there, furthering the plan. Now that I've decided these are a couple of the ways I would do it, like if I were going to attempt suicide, I would take pills. So then you start stockpiling pills. Or if I were going to do it, I would make it look like an accident. So then you increase your insurance plan. So your family, you make it look like an accident so your family can get the insurance payout. That is like the riskiest stage, because that's right before the attempt comes. What's excruciatingly important about this continuum that I just described is like, it's not a linear continuum. So absolutely, sometimes the pain can be so acute that it just goes from here to attempt without going through any of those phases. And a lot of times, and I think part of this, and Michele and Heather, you can tell me if you agree, part of this is that as a general public, we haven't been trained to see this, or even when we do see it, we're afraid to see it. And so we blind ourselves to it. We don't see our loved ones or people who are important to us walking along that spectrum, even though if they came and sat in one of our offices or called the chat line, we would be able to see that spectrum, having been trained in it. So look for that movement in yourself. Look for it in the people that you know and that you care about. And I always say, see something, say something. People are so afraid to say, have you thought of suicide? No, just say it. I think I see you talking about death a lot. Do I?
To Nzinga's point, I served on a panel 3 or 4 years ago, and we had a clinician tell everyone in the audience, turn to the person to your left and say these words. You don't have to respond to them. Just say these words. Have you ever considered dying by suicide? Have you ever thought about not waking up tomorrow? Have you ever thought about making an early exit? And at first it was like awkward, like no one wanted to be first. And she's like, no, we're not going to continue this panel until you ask this question. And the whole exercise was saying, look, you just survived asking that question. You did not get struck by lightning. This is something that you can say. So the next time you have to say it, it won't be the first time. So I encourage the audience, find someone to practice asking tough questions to. And it's going to feel awkward at first, but you never know when you have to be that one person to ask it. Now, with that being said, we do know that there are resources in place that can help address that question. Maybe resources that are there to be the ones ask the question. We have a representative right here with the Trevor Project, our dear friends at 1-800-273-TALK. So many people know that those numbers exist, that those chat lines exist, that those text lines exist, but a lot of us don't know what they do or how those conversations play out. So, Michele, could you explain a little bit about how crisis services like yours help for someone that is considering suicide?
Sure. And I, really want to also frame a little bit around like what we ask individuals and what we look for, and reframe it a little bit under the Trevor Project's work with young people, because one of the things we also see is that there's a misconception that LGBTQ young people are more likely to consider suicide because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. And that's actually a misconception. And really what we see is a higher risk of suicide because of the multiple risk factors around isolation, rejection, a lot of the issues that I've mentioned, discrimination, violence, not feeling like you can express your gender identity as non-binary or trans. And so, a lot of our work is making sure that a young person can come to us and know that that competency is going to meet them immediately with that first chat or text or phone call, and that they're going to have an affirming community that is going to really help them feel empowered around their circumstances, what tools or resources they may have available, what is there one friend or one family member that they can think through or think of as a person that they can reach out to, identifying their strengths, and also just making sure that they know they're loved and beautiful as they are and are not alone. I mean, very often we see LGBTQ young people really just feeling like they don't deserve to live because nobody loves them for who they are. And that is the biggest piece of our work, is saying, no, you are exactly who you should be. And we are there for you, and you are a beautiful person, and we are here for you whenever, 24/7, if you're having that thought at 3 a.m. or you're having it at 3 p.m.
Such an important distinction. I love that you took the time to spell that out, that there's nothing unique to the LGBTQ mind, but these are people who have experienced these contributing factors at higher rates from a sociographic level. So yeah, Michele, thank you for that. So what I'm hearing is these voices. We started talking about disconnect, and you said one thing we can offer is this unconditional positive regard, sense of connection, that if you need that one voice, you got one here. I'm curious if anyone on the panel would care to talk a bit about how these conversations, when you contact a crisis line, unfold. How, if I were to call right now, how does the conversation start? What, I guess, is the trajectory of these conversations? Do I have to say the first word, or will someone help me navigate this?
I mean, typically the young person will say the first word. They are reaching out, and it can be one word. It could be hello. It could be hi. It could be I'm here. And then we really train our counselors to build rapport around, what is on that young person's mind, and asking open-ended questions to try to find out more. What is the presenting issue? Is it around identity or family or another stressor? And really, working with that young person on finding out more information, and then assessing risk along the way, asking some of those tough questions around, are you considering suicide? Are you safe? What are the ways that, you want support and help, and how can we make sure that we're helping you navigate that? And so a lot of the work is both building the rapport, making sure the young person can feel comfortable and respond to open-ended questions without pushing, without forcing, but also assessing that risk along the way to make sure that we are doing the right level of support according to that risk level. And the young person really decides when the conversation's over. So that's why they're really empowered. We're not begging them to stay on that chat or text or phone line. They're really deciding the beginning of that conversation and the end, and whether they need to reach back out to us again. And so, we really believe that that is the type of service that young people need when they're in crisis, and they are empowered to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah. Heather, would you mind chiming in on that that line of discussion with agency and with empowering? And I guess what are ways that we can lend agency and an empowering voice to someone that may be struggling with suicidal ideation? I know I just
depends on the individual, right? So
Yeah,
well, actually, what I think is interesting, especially with working with teens, they're in this interesting point in their human experience where they're trying to create autonomy. And so agency is really important to them. And it's really important to their development as humans and their brain development and all those things. So just like what Michele said, empowerment and creating agency and creating a sense of resiliency, and that I'm not doing this for you, you're doing this. Mm-hmm. Whatever milestone they make in therapy, I always give it back to them. This had nothing to do with, I'm no healer. I am just a container for your healing. So I really empower them with strengths perspective, just looking at all of their strengths and how much agency they have over their life. Whether even the agency of the decision to perhaps take their own life, that in itself is gosh, it's really, I'm trying to find the right words for it. But they have the choice of what they want or not want to make of their life. And I say that in not a way of like that I'm not trying to say that suicide is a choice, because it's a place of incredible despair. But when they get out of it, or when they see some hope in it, I put that back on them, that was a skill that they just learned. So that creates some grit and resiliency in them. I hope I answered that question.
No, totally. I oftentimes, when I speak about suicide, just to get beyond the word, I often describe it as the fatal result of a restricted perspective. So much of the battle is in reminding this individual that there are other ways to look at your life, other ways to look at this crisis, other ways to look at the context that we're navigating. And therein, we have crisis lines to help you be reminded of other people that care. We have clinicians to not fix you, but rather be sources, these containers, like you said, of healing, to say, look, if you need to draw a little bit from this well, it's there for you. And there's obviously a number of different ways that we can intervene and provide treatment that we can lead people on pathways of recovery. And to kick this to Nzinga, we had a viewer who's asking about antidepressants, and they're wondering, are antidepressants the only option for dealing with thoughts of suicidal ideation?
The short answer is no. So I think the answer, you could have put any word in there, and it will never be the only option for dealing with thoughts of suicide or ideation. So if the suicide is part of a depression or bipolar disorder or an addiction or some other physical health condition like thyroid, then yes, medication can be one of the pieces. But I think what we've been talking about here is that human connection and life meaning and life purpose and mindfulness and being able to see beyond this moment right now will always be parts of managing any thoughts of suicide. So obviously I'm a psychiatrist, I prescribe antidepressants. I always tell people this medication can give us a foundation, but connection and meaning and life purpose and value and having a safe place and a safe person has to do more for us. Can I go back to a couple of things that Michele and Heather led me to want to say?
Please do.
One of the barriers I often hear from people is that they were having thoughts of suicide and they wanted to reach out, but they were afraid that they would immediately be committed to an institution. Mm. And so I want to dispel that myth. Just having thoughts of suicide does not immediately result in your civil rights and your autonomy being stripped away and you being thrown in an institution. And I think, Michele, part of the reputation that the Trevor Project has built among young people is that safe place, because young people fear telling their parents a lot of times, or the adults in their lives, because we're so quick to steal the autonomy of young people. But you see that in older adults as well. We're so quick to steal the autonomy of older adults. And so that fear that if I ask for help for this, my autonomy will be stripped. One, is not overarchingly true, but two, is something that we do need to work on for those age groups for sure, that we strip. And then the other thing I'll say that I think crisis lines are really good at, and we try to do this with our centralized call center at Eleanor Health. It doesn't, when a person calls in, the connection does not have to be about suicide. When you call Eleanor Health, the connection does not have to be just the end goal is to get you into treatment for addiction or substance use disorder. Sometimes you just need a connection, and you just need to text with someone, and you just need to call someone. And so I think what our crisis lines do very well, like Michele was saying, is like, let that person drive the conversation. So when you ask, how is it going to go? It's really, you're going to take us to where it's going to go. On the other end, we're just going to be a person who is like actively and proactively wanting to connect with you to help see outside of this current moment.
No, thank you for adding those thoughts. We are starting to run short on time. And this is another one that I didn't prep y'all for. So if you want to pass, that's totally fine. What is one myth that you wish you could dispel in lightning round form regarding suicide?
Well, that myth I mentioned before, and I do want to reiterate it because I think it's still out there, which is that LGBTQ youth are more likely to commit suicide based on their gender and sexual identity. And really understanding that the way young people and their sexual and gender identities are discriminated against and not supported is actually what puts them more at risk, and why community and people who accept them for who they are is so critical in prevention.
Excellent, thank you.
Let's see. That something is wrong with you because you feel hopeless. Glennon Doyle wrote a book, Untamed, which is phenomenal. And one of the things that she says is, I haven't been fine since I put the drugs down. And because human experience, it's dealing with pain, and it's okay not to be okay. It's actually really, really normal. And there's nothing wrong with you. Like, there's actually something right with you, that you're feeling things and that your heart breaks and you don't know how to deal with it. And so I just really want to tell that to anyone who's listening and struggling with the shame of feeling, because that's human, and it shouldn't be something that we repress and separate ourselves from you because of.
I love that. There's something right with you. There's nothing wrong with you. I would say one myth that I'll dispel is people think the most commonly associated condition with suicide is depression, when it's actually alcohol and other drug use. And to Heather's point and to Michele's point, it's because the risk factors are a common pathway to substance use disorder and suicide, depression also. But I really want people to look at the way you're using alcohol, cigarettes, other drugs, marijuana included, because if that pain is so unbearable, that risk is there.
Awesome. Y'all, we could have talked for another hour at least, but thank you all so much for your contributions. I would love, if you're comfortable, just letting us all know where we can find you after this conversation. How can we pick your brain after this moment comes to an end? We'll start with Heather.
So you can find me on social media at Monroe Wellness, MONROE Wellness, and also at www.monroewellness.com and Newport Academy, part of the team.
Awesome. Michele, how can we keep tabs on you?
Yeah, well, if you're a young person, I do want to remind all the young people out there that there's no problem that is too small, no issue that is too insignificant. And you can always text us at 678-678 or call us at 1-866-488-7386. And then you can find me at thetrevorproject.org.
And I will close us out. So you can find us at eleanorhealth.com. We have free online support groups available to anybody in the world. No commitment, just support. You can find that on our page. You can listen to the In Recovery podcast wherever you get your pods. And you can find me individually on Twitter at N.A. Harrison, MD, like medical doctor.
Incredible. Again, Heather, Nzinga, Michele, thank you so much for your time. For you viewers, thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing this. Thank you for keeping the conversation going. As a reminder, Sunday starts National Suicide Prevention Week. I know everyone here is going to be pounding the drum louder than ever. We're going to be having daily content on our website. You can check that out at worthlivingfor.com or TWLOHA.com. We have an exciting new podcast coming out. We're going to be doing more Instagram lives, and we're going to be trying to connect as many dots as possible. Make sure that your loved ones get connected to many of the fine resources we have represented here, as well as many more that you can find on our Find Help page of the website. But for now, we're signing off. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.